There is something happening inside you right now that you have never been given a name for. You have felt it, that pull toward another person so intense it borders on madness, that desperate hunger that disguises itself as love, that hollow ache in your chest that no relationship has ever truly filled. Most people live their entire lives chasing the feeling and never once ask the question that changes everything. What if what you have been calling love was never really love at all? Most people will scroll past this. They are not ready. But if you are still here, something in you already senses that the story you have been told about love, the one with destiny and soulmates and the other half that completes you, has been quietly destroying you from the inside. And you are tired of losing yourself to it. Carl Jung spent decades mapping the hidden architecture of the human psyche. What he uncovered about love is not taught in schools. It is not written on greeting cards. Because the truth he found is too uncomfortable, too exposing, too ruthless for a world that would rather keep you asleep. He warned that until you understand what is truly driving you toward another person, you will keep falling into the same pit with different faces and calling it fate. By the end of this, you will never look at love the same way again. Not because love disappears, but because you will finally be able to see it clearly, maybe for the very first time. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Carl Jung. Your greatest and most beautiful journey is the one that leads you back to yourself. Subscribe to Carl Jung Philosophy and hit the like button, and let's walk that path together. Have you ever noticed that after a betrayal or a breakup, love suddenly stops sounding romantic and starts to sound dangerous? What once made your pulse quicken now looks more like a temporary trance, a story you constructed about someone that was far more about your own interior world than it ever was about who they genuinely are. Maybe love has not vanished. Maybe the fog surrounding it is finally starting to thin. Jung observed that love, very often, is only the illusion of seeing ourselves as whole in another person. Before awakening, we throw ourselves into a glance, a smile, that strange electric sense of, "I feel like I have known you forever." And we rush to name it destiny. In truth, we do not love the other as they actually are. We love the sensation that someone has finally arrived to fill the emptiness that has lived inside us for so long. So the question worth sitting with is this: is the love you are in right now genuinely love? Or is it fear of loneliness dressed in romantic language? Is that person truly as singular as they appear? Or are they simply the perfect surface onto which your unconscious has been projecting everything it has never dared to face? What follows is the territory most love stories deliberately avoid. Why what you have been calling the love of your life might be nothing more than your unconscious reaching out for help. and why recognizing that is both the most painful thing you will ever do and the only doorway to a kind of love that no longer demands you surrender yourself to enter. Falling in love sounds like poetry, but seen through Jung's eyes, it looks far more like an act of flight than a miracle. We rarely enter love consciously. Most of the time, we plunge into it the way someone throws themselves into deep water, not to swim, but to drown out the noise echoing inside their own head. Notice the pattern. The times you have loved most intensely almost always appeared right when you were most exhausted with yourself. A period of stalled momentum, a creeping sense of meaninglessness, a loneliness you could not quite explain. And then someone appears. A few messages, a few thoughtful words, a few knowing glances. Your chest trembles. The sky seems brighter again. You call it fate. But if you are honest with yourself, it looks much more like a psychological life raft. Finally, something that spares you from having to confront your own interior. Jung once noted that people will do almost anything, no matter how irrational, to avoid a direct encounter with their own soul. Those hollow spaces, the questions, who am I? What do I genuinely want? Why does my life feel so weightless? Are deeply uncomfortable because we have not learned how to remain present with them. So we look for an exit. Love, or more precisely, the intoxicating sensation of being chosen by someone, functions as an instant anesthetic. Instead of sitting with our anxiety, we dissolve into texting, calling, building fantasies about shared futures, imagining every small moment together. And just like that, the loneliness is painted over in warm colors. Falling in love is actually a precise phrase, because the gravitational force does not come from the other person. It rises from the lack inside us. We do not fall because of them. We fall because we cannot endure ourselves. When you say, "I do not even understand how I got so tangled up with this person," they are not even that remarkable. That is your unconscious showing itself. The other person does not have to be extraordinary. What they possess is the precise frequency that resonates with the emptiness inside you. All they have to do is offer the sensation of being seen, and something in you grabs on like a child reaching for the first hand that appears in the dark. If you recognize yourself in this, if there is a version of your story here, drop 111 in the comments. It is the number of new beginnings. The moment a cycle becomes visible is the moment it can finally be broken. From a psychological perspective, loving this way is not substantially different from an avoidance mechanism. Rather than sitting with feelings of emptiness and meaninglessness, we use the stimulation of a new romantic connection to escape them. The dopamine generated by new messages, unexpected compliments, and the fantasy of a shared future all function like a sequence of small rewards that temporarily allow us to sidestep the central question. If this person were not here, could I stand being present with myself? Most of us would rather not answer that. So we keep falling, again and again. the way someone returns to a habit not because it serves them, but because the alternative is feeling everything they have been running from. Think of someone you know, or perhaps yourself, who simply cannot remain alone for long. A relationship ends, and within weeks there is someone new. Or there is a return to an ex, even when the damage is clearly beyond repair. On the surface, it reads as, "My heart simply loves. What can I do?" Underneath, it is something more specific. The sensation of being wanted, of receiving a simple text, becomes temporary evidence that I am not invisible. Society even quietly endorses this flight. Films, music, and novels elevate a particular kind of love, passionate to the point of irrationality, painful to the point of obsession, so consuming that letting go feels like death. The more dependent, the more destructive, the more impossible to release, the more we label it real love. Jung did not look at these narratives with romantic eyes. He examined them as a researcher studying the collective unconscious, and what he saw was a civilization using love as a mass strategy for avoiding the emptiness within. Some love stories begin from a single detail and expand to fill an entire inner universe. Someone simply listens to you speak about your past, and you immediately read a complete history into it. Finally, someone truly understands me. In reality, they may simply be being polite, but because genuine listening has been absent since childhood, that fragment of warmth clings to anyone who offers it. You are not only running from your present loneliness, you are also fleeing from old wounds by throwing yourself at someone new and calling that movement love. On a deeper level, falling in love also provides an escape from responsibility for the shape of our own lives. When we believe our fulfillment depends on locating the right person, we are relieved of the work of constructing a meaningful existence on our own. The other becomes a salvation project, a reason to postpone the question, if no one ever loved me, what would I do with this life? Jung was not opposed to love. He only warned, when love becomes the reason we stop growing, it has already been captured by the unconscious. We tell ourselves we are searching for someone to walk beside us. In truth, we are searching for a place to hide from our own unfinished becoming. That is why so many relationships fracture the moment one person begins to genuinely change. Because the relationship was not constructed on two people willing to face life together. It was constructed on the mutual need to escape from themselves. We have been exploring how falling in love functions as a form of running. But the mechanism that makes this possible, that takes an entirely ordinary person and transforms them into destiny, is something far more precise. This is where the unconscious process of projection enters. Jung described projection as the act of unconsciously casting our inner contents outward onto the external world, and then experiencing them as though they were objective reality. He wrote that projections transform the world into a reflection of one's own unknown face. This is why two people can encounter the same individual and experience them entirely differently. One perceives warmth and depth. The other senses coldness and distance. Neither is actually seeing the person as they are. Each is seeing their own projection. In love, this mechanism becomes extraordinarily powerful. When you are carrying lack, loneliness, and emotional incompleteness, anyone who touches the right interior wound can be elevated to the status of savior. They do not have to do anything exceptional. Your unconscious immediately begins painting over them. She is nothing like anyone I have encountered before. This person was made for me. Yet, if you returned and examined what they actually said and did, much of it would prove ordinary, even vague. Projection is particularly compelling because it is invisible from the inside. You do not think I am starving for love, so I am choosing to believe he genuinely cares about me. You simply know he cares about me. You do not say I am afraid of abandonment, so I am holding on too tightly. You say we have something rare. I can feel it. That absolute certainty is itself the signature that projection is operating at full intensity. The less self-awareness, the less interior questioning, the more room the projection has to expand. Drop 777 in the comments if you have ever looked back at a relationship and asked yourself, what was I actually seeing in that person? 777 carries the frequency of clear sight, the number of finally seeing through what you placed over someone else's face. In love, it is not only the difficult parts that get projected outward. The beautiful parts travel the same path. We project onto the other the tenderness we have not allowed ourselves, the courage we have not yet claimed, the wisdom we have not yet accessed. Rather than becoming those things ourselves, we simply say, he will provide that. It sounds considerably easier. The unconscious sidesteps the work of maturing by placing that task onto someone else and calling them love. Projection does not only construct an idealized image of the other, it quietly assigns your role as well. If you project onto them the image of the one who is always grounded, always capable of rescuing me from every situation, you automatically become the one who requires rescue. You begin speaking that way, choosing that way, living that way. And the unconscious deepens that role with each passing day. Eventually, you are no longer two people. You are two characters inside a script neither of you consciously wrote. In Jung's understanding, most of what we call love drama does not occur between two mature adults. It occurs between projections. The abandoned child inside you arguing with the mask of the betrayer you have placed over the other. Your invisible fear demanding proof of the opposite. Your hunger for control performing as, I am only worried about you. All of it circling in the unconscious, and we name it a profound, complicated love. This pattern will repeat with different faces until you notice that the common thread is not, they were all wrong for me, but that the film reel running inside you has never been changed. Awakening does not arrive on a wave of soft music and warm light. It arrives as a sudden flattening. The phrases that once moved you now sound like rehearsed lines. The gestures that once felt like proof that no one has ever loved me this way now reveal their limitations, their self-interest, their ordinariness. Yesterday, he noticed every detail about me. Today, you see clearly that he simply needs to control his environment. Yesterday, she was so emotionally perceptive. Today, you recognize she was often in pain and searching for someone to hold her together. The colored lens cracks, and what Jung calls the beginning of projection withdrawal has begun. The initial response is not relief. It is closer to panic. It is as though you are sitting in a darkened theater when the screen suddenly goes blank and every light in the room snaps on. You are no longer inside the story. You are simply sitting in an ordinary room surrounded by people you thought you knew. When the backdrop drops, the person across from you is no longer destiny. They are a limited human being, sometimes afraid, sometimes selfish, carrying wounds they have never examined. And if you are honest, you will feel a powerful pull to restore that backdrop immediately, to return to the version of the story where everything made sense. But once you have seen the fracture, it becomes very difficult to pretend it was never there. Psychology labels this the moment of disillusionment. For Jung, it is simultaneously a spiritual threshold because it is not only the image of the other that collapses. You do not simply lose an idealized lover. You lose the role of the chosen one, the special one. And for the ego, losing a role can hurt more than losing a person. The instinctive response is denial. People tell themselves everyone carries flaws. I have to learn acceptance. But they are not moving toward authentic love. They are trying to reassemble the backdrop with tape. They negotiate silently. As long as they stay, it is acceptable. As long as they still need me. They agree to remain inside the performance as long as they do not have to confront what the performance was covering. Jung named this precisely. The ego resists awakening because seeing the truth requires taking full ownership of your projections. It removes the comfort of blaming fate, blaming timing, blaming the other person. But if you do not retreat back into sleep, if you allow the light to remain on, something else begins to happen. After the initial waves of panic and grief, a vast quiet opens. You feel disoriented inside a relationship you once called home. You sit beside this person, and the sense of recognition has disappeared. Every attempt to reignite the feeling resembles trying to restore a stage whose foundation has already given way. That emptiness causes many people to conclude, I must have fallen out of love. But if you look with greater precision, you will recognize this is not love dying. It is projection dissolving. Jung returned to this distinction repeatedly. When projection withdraws, we encounter for the first time the possibility of seeing the other as an autonomous being, no longer simply a mirror of what we carry inside. This is simultaneously liberating and frightening. Liberating because you are no longer exhausted by the maintenance of a perfect image. Frightening because you must now accept that this person can leave at any moment. They did not arrive to heal you. They have their own interior landscape, their own private wounds, their own path. In the moment of awakening, a new question surfaces. If this person is no longer my rescue, why am I here? This question strikes at the foundation of everything. You begin to recognize that many things you called sacrifice, unconditional giving, were actually an unconscious transaction. I give you everything. You must confirm that I deserve to be loved. When you see that contract clearly, you cannot return to loving the way you did before, because now you know. When the curtain of illusion falls, it is not only the love story that transforms. The entire tone of your inner world shifts. This is the passage into what Jung, in many of his reflections, described as the desert of the soul. At first, this desert takes on a recognizable shape. The mornings without a good morning, the weekend evenings that stretch without anyone to send your thoughts to, the small rituals that once orbited one person, now suspended in empty air. But if the experience remains at the level of missing someone, you have not yet entered the true desert. The real desert begins the moment you understand that even if they returned, even if someone new materialized, the space in your chest would still be present. Loneliness no longer carries the face of a specific person. It opens into something vast, an interior expanse you have no map for. Jung described individuation as the journey of becoming oneself. That phrasing sounds graceful until you press your own skin against it. In practice, it feels like being severed from everything that once answered the question of who I am. You are no longer someone's partner, someone's other half. You are simply yourself. But who is this self beyond every role and label? Not many people are willing to remain with that question long enough to receive an answer. Because the moment you genuinely ask it, everything else begins to feel strangely transparent, as if you can see through the surface of the distractions that used to feel solid. If you are somewhere in this desert right now, not missing a specific person, but missing yourself, drop 520 in the comments. 520 hertz is the frequency of the heart, the resonance of someone who has stopped performing love and started approaching it with honesty. You are not alone in this. This particular loneliness is unlike any other. It is not the sensation of being discarded. It is what happens when you finally put your phone down, stop generating noise, stop reaching for anyone available to distract you, and simply sit in a quiet room with yourself. At first, the mind will exhaust every available escape. But if you hold the silence long enough, different sounds begin to surface. A memory returns with such clarity you can almost sense the texture of that day. A sentence spoken by a family member years ago suddenly echoes in the middle of the night. The image of your younger self in a moment of pain surfaces quietly, without warning. You begin to understand that what hurt you most was not the most recent person who left. It was a long accumulation of moments in which you were not witnessed, not chosen, not held. All of it queued up inside you, waiting. Jung wrote that the self, the totality we carry within us, only begins to genuinely emerge when the persona and the shadow begin to stand side by side in our awareness. The desert is where that meeting happens. You see yourself not only as the generous one, the one who gives endlessly, but also as someone who is afraid, who controls, who withholds. You see that you hunger for love and are simultaneously capable of suffocating the person you love out of terror of being abandoned. You can no longer maintain the edited version of your own story. And although that recognition carries shame and disappointment, it is precisely the first movement of individuation. The willingness to see yourself in full, without selection, without the flattering filter. There will be nights you ache for human warmth so intensely you tremble, and then recognize you cannot return to half-real connections simply to quiet the ache. There will be evenings you open old conversations, your thumb hovering over send, and then stop, because you know that sending it would be a betrayal of the clarity you have only recently found. In other people's eyes, this reads as coldness. To the soul, it is a new form of loyalty. To the path you are walking, to the self you are gradually uncovering. Individuation does not demand that you withdraw from the world, but it does require that you release the illusions that once functioned as painkillers. It does not tell you to stop loving. It asks you to stop using love as a reason to avoid meeting yourself. And at some point on this journey, something unexpected shifts. Being alone is no longer a sentence you are serving. It becomes a natural state. Not the absence of someone, but the presence of yourself. The underlying panic has gone. That is the sign that the desert has begun its transformation into something closer to a private sanctuary. The place where you finally encounter yourself without requiring anyone else to introduce you to your own interior. So what does love look like when someone has walked through all of this? When someone is no longer willing to fall blindly, how do they love? This is where falling in love gives way to something more grounded. Something Jung might describe as standing in love. Falling in love is the image of losing your footing, of being swept away from your own center, of dissolving into another person's gravity. Standing in love is an entirely different posture. You enter love upright, on your own ground. You do not disappear into the other. You arrive with your own history, your own values, your own interior life fully present, and from that place, clear-eyed and unhurried, you extend your hand and say, "I want to walk beside you." Jung wrote that genuine maturity is not the dissolution of self into another, but the capacity to remain a distinct individual while still connecting deeply. In this kind of love, the phrase, "You are my everything," sounds immediately off. They understand that to make another person everything is to once again entrust their entire interior life to someone who is ultimately limited and human. The inner sentence becomes, "You are not everything, but you are a part of my life that I genuinely value and consciously choose." That distinction returns something essential to love. It becomes a shared space where two people can live and remain accountable for their own experience. One of the clearest markers of love after awakening is the absence of manipulation. The awakened person is no longer interested in going silent to measure the other's anxiety, withdrawing and then returning to assess how desperately they are needed. They recognize that every time they do that, they are treating both themselves and the other as objects to be managed rather than human beings to be respected. Instead, they speak plainly. This affected me. This does not feel right. I need space. Embedded within those simple sentences is something that was once exceptionally rare: full ownership of one's own emotional experience. Drop 11 in the comments if you feel this shift happening inside you right now. 11 is the threshold number, the portal between who you were in love and who you are becoming. It appears in the moments just before everything changes. A person once left a reflection in the Jung philosophy community. After giving each other space and returning, I realized something had genuinely shifted. In the past, conflict meant silence, then intensity, then blame. Now, when I feel hurt, instead of assigning all of it to him, I say, "When that happened, I felt disregarded." And he no longer responds by attacking. He pauses and says, "I hear you, and I notice I am still feeling defensive. I probably need a moment to understand why." What I realized was that we had stopped using arguments to determine a winner. The air was still heavy, but it no longer felt like combat. It felt like two people pressed into a difficult space, genuinely looking at what they were doing to each other. In standing love, personal limits are not a form of rejection. They are the condition that prevents love from becoming consumption. The awakened person can love with great depth and still will not dismiss what they feel in order to preserve a surface peace. They are capable of saying, "I love you, and I will not accept the way you speak to me when you are in pain." These sentences once would have triggered panic about being left. Now, they matter more than the fear, because if love can only survive their silence about what is harming them, it is not love. It is an endurance agreement. Another quality of love after awakening: the two people no longer need to remain fused to feel secure. Distance is no longer a threat. It is the room each person needs to continue growing. They still have their own friendships, their own work, their own interior life, not out of diminished affection, but out of the understanding that a single romantic bond cannot carry the entire weight of a human life. Love after awakening also looks clearly at impermanence. There are no longer sweeping promises of forever used to reassure each other in moments of uncertainty. The awakened person understands that people evolve, circumstances transform, paths diverge, and that none of this diminishes the reality of what exists today. Rather than obsessing over how long will we last, the question becomes, while we are still walking together, how are we choosing to treat each other? This does not make love after awakening painless. It can still close your throat when the other speaks carelessly. It can still hollow you out when you must part because your trajectories no longer run parallel. The difference is this: the pain no longer pulls self-destruction behind it. You do not collapse into a version of yourself that has forgotten its own name. You can sit in the grief, move through it honestly, and feel something underneath that does not waver. A quiet foundation that says, "I will not disappear into this." Perhaps the most quietly radical thing about standing in love is the freedom it extends to both people. You do not need the other to breathe, so you do not need to confine them to feel secure. You become capable of meaning it when you say, "I want you to be happy, even if that one day no longer includes me." Not as a rehearsed line, but as something you can genuinely carry without breaking. And precisely because of that, if they choose to stay, their presence holds an entirely different quality. It is no longer obligation. It is no longer fear of what your collapse would cost them. It is a decision made in freedom. And a decision made in freedom is the only kind worth receiving. You can probably sense now why those who have genuinely awakened are no longer swept away so easily. This is not numbness. It is the transformation of what love means, from a burning that must be fed constantly to be believed real, to a steadiness that can accompany two people through ordinary days, through long silences, through the full weight of genuine difference. The original question, why do the awakened no longer fall in love, was built on a flawed foundation from the beginning. It is not that they have lost the capacity to love. It is that they are no longer willing to use love as a cover pulled over the fractures within. When the fog lifts, love has nowhere left to hide. It returns to its actual shape, or it departs. And between those two possibilities, the only thing that has genuinely transformed is your gaze. From searching for someone to rescue you, to learning how to walk beside someone without abandoning yourself in the process. Jung does not remove your capacity for romance. He removes only your illusions, to see whether you are courageous enough to remain with what survives. You may love fewer times, with considerably less noise. But each time you choose to step into it, that choice is conscious. It is not an unconscious plunge. It is a deliberate, open-eyed decision made by someone who has already survived their own interior desert and no longer requires love to be the proof of their worth. And if you ever find yourself standing inside a relationship where you do not have to make yourself smaller, do not have to perform a version of yourself to be accepted, do not have to beg to remain, then what you have found is not simply love for another person. It is the clearest sign that you have finally, at last, stopped turning your back on yourself. Some people search their entire lives for a love that feels like home. What Jung understood, and what very few are willing to hear, is that the love which truly holds you is not the one that arrives from outside. It is the one you build within, slowly, honestly, through every moment you chose truth over comfort and presence over performance. That is the love he was pointing toward the entire time, not the love that pulls you away from yourself in a beautiful, destructive spiral. The love that, against all the noise and all the longing and all the years of running, finally brings you all the way back home.